Good morning. My name is Mark Baldassare, and I'm the President and CEO of the Public Policy Institute of California. Thank you for joining us. PPIC is pleased to present this program featuring United States Senator Alex Padilla. This event is part of PPIC's 2021 speaker series on California's future. As a public charity, PPIC does not take or support positions on any ballot measure or legislation, nor does it support, endorse, or oppose any political parties or candidates for public office. We would like to thank the sponsors of this series for their underwriting support. These organizations are listed on your screen and on our website. This series is also funded by the PPIC Donor Circle and the PPIC Corporate Circle, individuals and organizations that provide generous support to PPIC. Please consider joining us as a sponsor or donor to make more public programs like today's possible. More information is available at ppic.org. And before we begin, if you have a question for Senator Padilla, please send an email to the email address on the screen and include your name and organization along with your question, ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. We will have time at the end of the program to devote to questions. I'd now like to welcome our featured speaker, US Senator Alex Padilla. Senator Padilla, congratulations on your recent appointment.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me. Good to be back with you. Kind of miss our in-person gatherings, but PPIC is always a great audience.
Thank you. In 2020, we spoke twice. Once at our last public event before the pandemic on February 3rd in Sacramento, and then you were featured at our first virtual speaker series event on June 5th when you were California Secretary of State. So we have a lot to catch up on in the last 10 months, which have been, obviously very, very meaningful for the country and the state. So I'd like to start by asking you, from your new vantage point, what is the most important thing the federal government can do to help support an equitable and sustainable recovery in California?
Yeah. Look, I think just asking that very question is a huge leap forward. As I was, making the transition from the Secretary of State's office to the United States Senate, it was frankly a continuation. As we've talked in prior events, in my prior capacity as Secretary of State, a big motivation, inspiration for a lot of the reforms vis-a-vis access to the ballot in California had to do with equity. We knew which communities had been disproportionately registering at lower rates, participating at lower rates, and therefore didn't have their political voice as heard in the process as they deserved. And the same applies in so many other areas, so many other fields, so many other sectors, whether it's in access to healthcare, whether it's in environmental justice or criminal justice concerns, economic opportunity, et cetera. And I think, given the very, very difficult year that we've all been through, more than a year now since the official beginning of the pandemic, it's brought to light, from my view, sort of two parallel pandemics. One, COVID-19 from a health perspective. We know which communities have been disproportionately impacted, but it's also both exacerbated and put a spotlight on all the underlying inequities in society. It's not just access to the vaccine or the closest hospital or COVID testing site. When you look at how many kids are learning virtually throughout the state and who has a good quality interconnection and who doesn't, or even the digital literacy skills to stay engaged. As we look at what we've done to try to keep the economy going, who's disproportionately working in the essential workspaces in our state and in our nation, and therefore disproportionately at risk from COVID exposure, those sorts of things. And of course, we reflect on last summer, as we're having this event, the trial in Minneapolis is happening. And we know what the killing of George Floyd did to, spawn another national movement calling for addressing inequities and systemic discrimination in all its forms around the country. So what can we do? We start by asking the questions. Second, we look at policies, and we can look at a lot of legislative proposals in a number of these areas. But most significantly, we got to invest in closing the gaps And I think the American Rescue Plan, the first true COVID response under the Biden administration, goes a long way in doing that.
Thank you. So $1.9 trillion COVID relief package, which you just referred to, that is a lot of new resources. I'd like you to share with Californians within that package what you see as some of the key elements that will impact life here in California.
Yeah, no, it's appreciate the opportunity. It's, I got to tell you, I'm very proud that amongst my first significant votes and significant actions as a US Senator on behalf of California was to help advocate for some of the individual pieces and then vote for the American Rescue Plan. It is a big number. It's what most economists suggested we needed to do, go big, not go small in terms of investing in COVID response and laying the groundwork for an economic recovery. Most people by now, I hope, have heard of some of the bigger ticket items like investing in improved vaccine manufacturing, distribution, supplies to states and localities around the country, and specific line items for more equitable distribution of the vaccines. Significant dollar amounts being distributed in direct assistance to families. Think of all the families that have been either struggling to keep up with the mortgage or to pay the rent, fear of eviction, or even fear of not knowing where their next meal is coming from. Those were some of the bigger ticket items, along with funding for state and local governments. That wasn't included in all the previous relief packages in the year 2020, but a down economy was impacting state and local government budgets. And so it was important to buttress state and local governments in addition to school districts. But I think, another line item for schools, because as we're all, hoping that schools reopen sooner rather than later, we want to make sure that it's done safely. And so we know what to do. Schools just needed the resources to implement the COVID protocols to be able to reopen safely. And I think most school districts are now sort of on the horizon of kids going back in person. A couple of the lesser highlighted areas of the American Rescue Plan that I think are profoundly important. One, a significant expansion of the earned income tax credit, right? We're talking about equity in your very, very first question. We know that, working families will disproportionately benefit from our investment in the earned income tax credit for people who work. Most people would agree with that, absolutely. Another one, the expansion of the child tax credit. And let me just sort of underscore how profoundly significant these are. The expansion of the child tax credit has the potential to uplift half the children in the country who are currently living in poverty out of poverty. Think about that. In California alone, that figures 500,000 children could be, lifted up out of poverty through just that one piece of the American Rescue Plan. So I think it is, yes, a big number, but an important number in a comprehensive, inclusive approach to addressing the COVID-19 pandemic and then setting a stage for the next package, which is more economic recovery and economic stimulus.
And I thank you very much. I think for the people listening to this program, very important for them to hear about some of the elements like EITC and child care tax credits, as well as some of the things that have gotten more notice. I wanted to talk with you also about the $2 trillion infrastructure proposal that is now under discussion. I think that that will be a very big topic in Congress over the next several weeks. And what can you tell us about the infrastructure proposal and also how it will impact California?
Great. So yes, we're currently in a what's known in Senate lingo as a state work period. So we're still working, but working in state, not in the Capitol. We return next Monday on April 12th. And so if you've been following the news, that's why you've hopefully have heard and read about my visits to some of the mass vaccination centers in Northern California, Southern California, some of the other activities that we're having in state. But when we do return to Washington, I think there's a couple of front burner topics that will occupy our time pretty quickly. One is this infrastructure package that you're hearing about. And I hope the other that either runs parallel or as close to it as possible is immigration reform, which I'm sure we'll get to in a few minutes.
Yeah.
As it pertains to infrastructure, I guess a couple of things. I mean, for starters, President Biden campaigned on it. We heard a lot of build back better, build back better, build back better. And so now before us is a question of what does that mean? There's some high-level markers put out there, a couple $2 billion. What should it include? And of course, how we pay for it. Good parliamentary news coming out of the Senate yesterday. We do have the opportunity to be able to act on it if we have to, with 50 plus 1 votes as opposed to the 60 votes required for items that are subject to a filibuster. So I think that gives us more latitude in negotiations. For starters, I think build back better for Padilla means building back sustainably and building back inclusively. When I say build back sustainably, for me, investing in infrastructure, it's a lost opportunity if all we do is address some deferred maintenance in California and across the country. I think we have a chance to invest and upgrade our infrastructure and advance some climate change policies to address the existential threat that climate change represents. When I say building back inclusively, it also means let's be smart about investing and not just upgrading and strengthening our infrastructure, but in all the job creation that comes with that. That it is quality job creation, and that we can really provide that economic opportunity, especially for people that haven't historically participated in economic recovery. And so I think there's pretty broad consensus over just having that value lens as we approach this. The other thing that I hope is good news for everybody watching today is that it is inclusive from what constitutes infrastructure standpoint. As I mentioned, it's not just roads and bridges. We can use that dollar amount to invest in our water infrastructure, in our electrical infrastructure, in housing, in education, right? Not just K-12, but higher education as well, and more. So it's not just about addressing deferred maintenance. It's about setting ourselves up to be competitive and successful in the years ahead with a growing population while addressing climate and other challenges.
Mm-hmm. So I believe you were appointed to the Senate Budget Committee, I heard, and I'm wondering about how the Senate Budget Committee is, looking at all these numbers. I mean, this is an historic time, and these are historic packages. And what are the discussions around the amount of spending and the revenues and the deficit and all the things that budget committees typically talk about?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. And just as a side note, yes, we have a full plate in terms of committee assignments. Still haven't hit my 100 days in office yet as a senator, but the workload has certainly been there pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I serve on the Homeland Security Committee, the Judiciary Committee, Environment and Public Works, where a lot of this infrastructure conversation will take place, the Rules Committee, and the Budget Committee. To your question about budget, right? Because we just voted on a $1.9 trillion package, and now we're looking at a $2 trillion item going forward. I think the debate is, so how are we going to pay for it? My initial sense, and everything is still subject to negotiation here, is that it won't necessarily all be on the federal credit card, if you will. It won't be complete deficit spending. The American Rescue Plan was, and again, supported by economists and others as the right thing to do, act with urgency. Other ways of paying for this package, I hope, include addressing some of the tax inequities that we have currently in the federal tax structure. When the wealthiest Americans and large corporations are paying less than their fair share, if or possibly nothing, compared to hardworking families, there's an opportunity to address that and help finance this infrastructure investment. That's number one. Number two, is for all my years in public service at the municipal level, at the state level, I haven't seen a large scale infrastructure project rely on a single source of government funding alone. A lot of the larger projects have federal and or state and or county or city funding associated with it. So I think we're looking at some leveraging opportunities in how we cover the costs of some of these infrastructure projects. And of course, there's always the opportunity to partner with the private sector. Public-private partnerships, when structured well, help leverage and stretch taxpayer dollars. So I think it's all on the table as we're looking to both how we pay for it, but what we're paying for.
Well, there's certainly a lot to talk about in the infrastructure proposal, as well as the relief package which just passed. So as you mentioned, it hasn't even been 100 days yet as US Senator. I counted about 2.5 months since you were sworn in. So for those of us who have followed your career in California, can you share with us the call from Governor Newsom about your nomination, and what it was like to tell your family about the fact that you had a new job in DC?
What I refer to now is the Zoom scene around the world, because I've gotten a lot of comments on that video. It certainly made the rounds online.
Yeah.
I can't believe it was December 22nd, just a few months ago. It feels like an eternity at this point. As I think, as you saw the video, the words I used, I was humbled and I was honored, and indeed that is the feeling. Yes, I've been in public service for a long time now, but the United States Senate is a unique opportunity and tremendous responsibility. If participating in the passage of the American Rescue Plan, it's not an indicator, it's a reminder of the power of government, the power of good that you can do when we put the work in and we're thoughtful in the actions that we take, and trying to ride that momentum into all these other issue areas that I mentioned: healthcare and climate and immigration reform, criminal justice reform, et cetera. I'm going to be honest, I have more than a couple of friends and family members that said, come on, how'd you get emotional? You must have known the call was coming in. And I did it. I was hoping for it, of course. Yeah. But when it happens, as much as I might have been working towards it, hoping for the opportunity, again, just the enormity of the responsibility, I couldn't help but immediately reflect on my family's journey. Sure. And I've shared with you, Mark, in prior events, our story starts with my parents immigrating from Mexico to the United States in search of a better life. Right? Yeah. My father working as a short order cook, my mom cleaning houses for 40 years, trying to provide for my sister, my brother, and I that better life, emphasizing education. And to think that in one generation, we've gone from immigrants, cooks, and housekeepers to me serving in the United States Senate. You can't help but get emotional. Yeah. You also be very clear. While I'm honored to share my story, I know that it's just our family story. There's millions of other families working equally hard to achieve their American dream and struggling even before the pandemic to achieve their dream. And that's what public service is all about for me, making sure that dream and that better life is achievable, accessible, and attainable for more families and for future generations. Because when given the opportunity, look at the contributions to the nation that we've seen from immigrant families throughout the course of our history, and should continue to. And so when I talk about the opportunity and responsibility to share my story in the US Senate, it's because, well, it might have been heard or acknowledged in years past, not quite like I plan to and have begun to do so already. Our families deserve to be heard and be part of the deliberation on every action in the Senate, and I'm going to take full advantage of that.
I was going to ask you, but I think you've already answered it in your response about what it means to be the first Latino from California in the United States Senate. But I would also add that it means a lot to other Latinos that you're the first Latino. And
I've heard a lot from folks up and down the state of California. Yeah, I've heard a lot from folks up and down the state, and frankly from friends and friends of friends throughout the country whose representatives aren't as diverse as their states are, at least not yet. Yeah.
And when you were sworn in by Vice President Harris, circumstances were such that it wasn't safe for your family to be there, and that must have, not been exactly the way you wanted it to go forward, but the way that it had to be done at that time.
Right. No,
I'm,
let me just, comment for a quick minute on that.
yeah,
In the prior question, you said, what it was like to share the news with my family
yeah,
about the call with the governor. And, obviously home with my wife and kids, we were able to hug and
yeah,
celebrate under normal circumstances. I'd run over to my dad's house and give him a big hug.
yeah,
But because of COVID, again, this was months ago before folks started getting vaccinated the way we are now, that wasn't possible. The fact that between traveling across the country during a global health pandemic, safety concerns and questions, the insurrection of January 6th that we all witnessed, it was a tough decision to not have my wife and kids with me the day of the swearing in.
yeah,
But again, a reminder of both the importance and the urgency of the work at hand. Um, but that moment, not just looking straight ahead at Vice President Kamala Harris administering the oath of office, but I look to my left, I see now Senator John Ossoff from Georgia. I
yeah,
look to my right, Senator Reverend Warnock from Georgia. The three of us getting sworn in at the same time. That's a whole lot of history, a whole lot of
yeah,
emotion in one
yeah.
frame. So
I can,
big day, big day.
I can only imagine what that was like. But yes. Uh, You have served in a Senate before, in this case, the California State Senate, where you served, and you were once named one of the most effective legislators. You passed over 70 bills. Can you tell us about what are some of the similarities and differences in terms of now working in the US Senate?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question because what I'm working through sort of in real time on how quickly we can have a bigger and bigger impact on the work product of the Senate. On the one hand, some of the basics are the same, right? You have a number of senators who happen to have a 50-50 split right now
Yeah,
in the Senate. So Democrats with the thinnest of majorities. But the question I get often is, you serve the state Senate in California with Democratic majorities. Here you need Republicans on occasion to move items along. How do you plan to reach across the aisle, that sort of thing? So I remind myself and others that when I was in the state Senate, it was in the days of it took 2/3 to
yeah,
pass a budget, not a simple majority. And so whether it was passing a budget or some legislation that we worked on, a big part of what we do is building the relationships, the rapport with colleagues on both sides of the aisle. You may not agree all the time, but you'll find the areas where you can agree on and continue to make progress. And so that's what I've been trying to begin to do in the US Senate, meet with every single one of my colleagues, not just on the Democratic side, but Republicans as well, trying to find those areas of agreement to be able to make progress. I think some of the biggest differences are really there's the official process and the unofficial process. In the state Senate, you can introduce bills left and right. You're going to get a committee hearing for the most part, and you work towards being heard in policy committee and appropriations, et cetera. At the federal level, it's one thing to introduce the bill, but a lot of different work to get a hearing in committee, true consideration of the committee and legislative movement. Things seem to be a little bit more controlled, a little bit more centralized by the leadership. And so when things happen, they happen big, but not as much happens as quickly. But that's been in recent years. We'll see how the next couple of years evolve.
yeah. So have you made some new friends in the Senate?
Yeah, it starts, collegiality is great.
Yeah,
Just as I mentioned, I think part of the value added I bring is to bring my perspective, my life journey and
yeah,
experience and stories of working families like mine. But it's also an opportunity to learn from others.
yeah,
Let's just take the Senate floor, for example. So the desk I now sit in is where Senator Harris used to sit. It's been moved. There's a little bit of a reshuffling that happens every session.
yeah,
To my left is Reverend Warnock from Georgia. Always good, always good for a good
nice.
story.
Yeah,
And to my right is Senator Warren from Massachusetts.
wow,
Who anybody who knows anything about her knows she's
yeah,
brilliant and has a plan for every policy question you can imagine. So enjoying talking to her, sharing family stories, but also learning just about the work itself. So you can go on and on. And Senator Menendez has been great. Senator Schumer, of course, was very good to me in terms of committee assignments and opportunities to have that voice in important committees as different issues will come through. Senator Booker from New Jersey, on and on.
And you served from California with a senator who is, I was looking up this morning, ranked 5th in terms of seniority in the US Senate. So, and of course, very early in your career, you had worked with her. And so I'm wondering what kind of advice she might have offered as somebody who's been in the Senate since 1992.
And so, Senator Feinstein has been nothing but gracious and extremely helpful and supportive, not only throughout the course of my career, but especially in the last couple of months. So it's another thing. Maybe I'll reflect on it and expand on it more someday in memoirs. But in the course of some 20 plus years, going from having been a field representative for her in the Los Angeles office to serving side by side with her in Congress, it's wow, right? It's inspiring.
It's an amazing story.
Extremely helpful. Her and her entire staff is, from the moment the appointment was announced to, as I was recruiting staff, interviewing for staff, hiring staff. In fact, one of my first hires was a legislative director by the name of Josh Esquivel, who up until joining my team was her legislative director. So it's just a small example of how we can make sure that 2 California senator offices are working as best as we can in collaboration on behalf of the state. And frankly, a little self-interest here, how I can hit the ground running by having very experienced staff, help me be effective on day one.
Yeah, certainly seniority and having that knowledge.
And look, an occasional, cup of coffee or an occasional phone call, and getting some of the institutional memory of the Senate as a body and some of the issues in judiciary, for example. We're talking once yet again, given recent tragedies, about gun control and gun safety in America. And of course, the assault weapons ban is part of Senator Feinstein's legacy. So to be able to get a deeper dive on not just what's been done in the past, but how it got done is helpful as we take on some of these issues going forward.
And let me ask you about gun control, because I know you're on the Judiciary Committee, so it's an issue that comes before you. Is there any possibility that there's going to be movement on this issue at the federal level this year? It's something that I think people are thinking about, especially looking at the events of recent weeks.
Right. God, I pray that there is progress. I pray that there's a lot of progress. We can talk about background checks. We can talk about assault weapons bans. We can talk about a whole lot of things. Given the political reality, I hear chatter kind of gelling around at least making progress on background checks, as opposed to some of the other items. Some of it has to do with policy and where there is or where there isn't support. Some of it has to do with the rules of the Senate. If we needed to get 60 votes to get anything done, we're going to be a lot more limited in how much we can get done, right? Just the raw politics of the institution. If we can get more done with the 50+1 votes, then we'll exercise all options. But for now, I'm hearing consensus building around at least a background check item. I wish it was a lot more, but we'll keep pressing the issue and hope it doesn't take more tragedies to finally get smart gun safety measures passed.
And let me ask you about the filibuster. We got some questions about that that came in prior to our event, and you mentioned that you served in the California State Senate when there was a 2/3 majority to pass the budget. That, of course, was changed. So can you explain for the people in our audience, what is all this stuff about the filibuster and what might possibly change, and what would that what would that mean?
Yeah, well, I think the bottom line here is, given what some people would say are rules, other people may argue are traditions of the United States Senate. It currently takes 60 votes, not a simple majority, but a 3/5 majority to act on most matters. The exception is this budget reconciliation process not to get into the weeds on it, but if it's budget related and confirmed by the parliamentarian, the nonpartisan parliamentarian, that it's a budget related item, then a few times we can act with 51 votes to get something passed. So we need to get 60 votes. You look at the partisan makeup of the Senate, and frankly, the political environment that we're in today. It's not, the same partisan dynamic that there was 10, 20, 30 years ago. It seems to be more intense. It seems to be more bitter. And so getting 10 Republicans is a lot harder today than it was in years past. So the bottom line question really is the filibuster still necessary, still relevant, still needed? I've been public, consistent. I am for eliminating the filibuster. I've seen it not just in the last several years, but over the course of history, used and exploited to obstruct progress in a number of areas. From civil rights during the era of the Jim Crow South, to more recently, to be able to make progress on gun safety, to be able to uphold our fundamental voting rights, for example, let alone expand access to quality healthcare or tackle climate change or anything else. Some of my good friends have warned me, be careful what you ask for, because what happens is if the Democrats are ever back in the minority, we're not going to like Republicans being able to act with simply 51 votes. But I think the situation is so dire that that's a chance I'm willing to take. It shouldn't have been this difficult to move needed resources to better respond to COVID as it was. And it shouldn't be as difficult to, again, whether it's gun safety, whether it's passing an infrastructure package, whether it's achieving immigration reform, or some of the other things that we know. And look, PPIC surveys quantify the level of support for some of these policy areas. It shouldn't be that difficult to get it passed when the demand from the American public is so clear.
Yeah, and I did want to turn to the issue of comprehensive immigration reform. We hear that federal lawmakers are discussing comprehensive immigration reform, which could include a path to citizenship, which, as you mentioned, something that our latest PPIC statewide survey for Californians showed not just that there's overwhelming support, but there's strong majority support across party lines, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, 60% or more. So as you think about immigration policy, what would be your goals in terms of a comprehensive immigration reform?
Yeah, no, I think, for starters, that it is something that's very, very comprehensive. And I know President Biden has first, a couple of weeks put out a big package proposal, which would be wonderful, right? Again, if we can get it through the Senate with 51 votes as opposed to 60, or if Republicans were willing to do what I believe is right and join us in a significant bipartisan package. Immigration reform, first of all, it's a long overdue. The last significant reform and updating of immigration laws was decades ago, 1986.
1986.
Is it hopeful? Am I hopeful that it can be done despite the tough political climate that we're living in? Yes. It was actually as recent as 2013 that there was a bipartisan measure approved by the US Senate. Didn't make it to the finish line, passed the House and signed by the president, but it tells me that it can be done. It can be done. There's a lot of chatter and support, for example, for helping protect dreamers. Right? People have in recent years really understood who dreamers are and why it makes sense to provide them security and a pathway to citizenship. And there's even bipartisan support for that. That's necessary, but that alone isn't everything that we need to shore up our immigration system. We see what's happening at the border, for example. Numbers are up seasonally, by the way. This happens every year. Some years the numbers are higher than others, where people are coming to the United States seeking asylum, whether they're fleeing poverty, fleeing violence, fleeing natural disasters, whatever it is. But the agencies responsible for processing these asylum requests have been starved from a resource standpoint. That's why you're seeing the backlogs and the wait times and everything else that manifests every spring. I have a bill. My very first bill introduced as a senator would extend to all non-citizen essential workers
Hmm.
security, and a pathway to citizenship. And for me, it's pretty clear, right? We talk about dreamers, and that's a clear, compelling case. But let's reflect on the pandemic that we've been living through for this last year. How many tweets have you seen? How many Facebook posts have you seen praising essential workers, workers on the front lines in healthcare, in agriculture, in transportation, in construction, so many of the sectors that we consider essential to keep the rest of us safe and to keep the economy moving? Did you know that across the country, there's more than 5 million undocumented immigrant essential workers? Essential workers recognized by the federal government for their work in these critical sectors. My God, if their sacrifice, if their risk of their health, if not their lives this last year hasn't earned them this, then what's it going to take? So that's my bill, to extend to all essential workers who aren't citizens that security and pathway to citizenship. An ideal package would include all 11 million undocumented immigrants. Again, this is a group of people that have been living here, working here, paying taxes here, and are American in every way, but that piece of paper, separate and apart from people who may be coming here seeking asylum.
So you mentioned essential workers and the numbers of undocumented immigrants and the impacts of the pandemic. And also in our recent PPIC survey, we found a majority of Californians, the largest majority we've ever seen, and the only time we've ever seen a majority among likely voters saying that they favor health care coverage for undocumented immigrants in California now. So that it was the finding that was most surprising to me because it was the biggest change since the last time we asked it. Do you think that when we look at health coverage and expanding health coverage, where do you see the federal government going in terms of supporting more people getting health coverage, especially now that we've gone through the pandemic and seen some of the impacts on different communities, specifically communities of color?
Right. Look, to me, healthcare is a fundamental human right. And so then the question isn't, who does get healthcare, who doesn't. Everybody deserves access to quality healthcare. The question is, how is it paid for, and how is it delivered? I agree with Senator Sanders. The ultimate ideal solution is a Medicare for all system, but we're not going to get there from one day to the next. I think we have tremendous opportunity to make significant gains and cover even more of the uninsured through a public option and other policies that President Biden has offered. And it starts with defending the Affordable Care Act. Why that's still a controversial item is beyond me. It has proven to be successful. Millions of more Americans, including millions in California, previously uninsured, now with access to a doctor or a medical professional when they're sick, and the sky hasn't fallen, right? And so we need to keep building on that. So I think as time goes on, people see the wisdom of that, accelerated by our experience during this pandemic. Imagine if, what are we going to say? Oh, only people with health insurance should wear masks and everybody else doesn't. That's not getting our arms around, the coronavirus, or vice versa. We're all in it together. When it comes to our health, when it comes to the public health, we're all in it together. Infectious diseases, including COVID-19, does not discriminate. Republican, Democrat, citizen, non-citizen, one state to the next. We're all in it together. And so it's in everybody's collective interest that everybody have access to quality health care.
I see we've had a number of questions come in on COVID, and I am going to, get to them, but I wanted to ask you a broader question from your seat of being one of 100 US senators now. So most Californians in our recent survey said the worst is behind us with COVID. And that was a change from even in January, our poll in January. So from your vantage point, how close is California to having COVID under control, and how is the vaccine distribution going in California?
Well, the vaccine distribution is going a lot better now than it was much earlier in the year. And in large part, and this is just how I see it factually, what a difference a president makes. A president that believes in science and trusts and empowers public health experts, not just Dr. Fauci, but let's just start with Dr. Fauci, right? And will amplify the common sense recommendations like wear a mask. I know the vaccinations got off to a little bit of a rocky start. By the way, and let me be blunt and direct here, there's no fault of Governor Newsom. He was dealt a bad hand by the prior administration. Really difficult to plan a smart vaccine distribution when your first delivery of vaccines was far less than you were told, and you don't know when the next batch is coming, right? So again, with the new administration, much more reliance on data and science, more reliable shipments of vaccines. We've accelerated vaccine deployment throughout the state, and the numbers are going up. I think more than 20 million vaccines have now been administered in the state of California. About a third, at least, a third of eligible adults, at least with their first shot. I want to say close to 20% now fully vaccinated. So we are making good progress in a short amount of time. Your question is, how close are we to the end of the pandemic or being, on the other side of it? Bottom line, it depends on all of us.
Yeah.
One of the vibes I'm sensing is I'm moving around a little bit because a lot is still restricted because of COVID, is that more people were getting vaccinated. There's this, I don't know if it's that or spring break or better weather, a combination of both. People are thinking, oh my God, the end is near. No, the end is not near. Even when you get the vaccine, you have to keep wearing your mask. You have to keep washing your hands. We have to keep distancing because even when you're vaccinated, there's a potential that you can get it. There's a potential that you can transmit it. And it's not until we have a certain percentage of the population that's vaccinated that it'll be safer to completely reopen. We still have to take those safety measures. So if we keep listening, I think, maybe by summer, by the fall, when schools reopen, things will be much more open than they are today. But if we slip back and people stop wearing their masks and are out visiting with others a little bit too much, too soon, too quick, we run the risk of sliding back in the progress on COVID. So it's up to all of us.
So it sounds like all of us have work to do, and the government is doing what it can to get the vaccines out. So you're a parent, and I hear from a lot of parents that the opening of schools is something that's been very frustrating to them in California. And how do you see it?
Yeah, it's we're just speaking for our family. Look, we're blessed. I have a job that allows me. Well, I'm traveling a little bit more now in the new job than when I was Secretary of State, doing the bulk of my work, via Zoom, virtual events, from the safety of home. There's a lot of other families out there that don't have that option. We've been able to stay safe and healthy. Homeschooling has been one of the toughest part of the last year for everybody. Tougher, I think, even for lower income families, whether it's internet connectivity, digital literacy, less space to kind of spread out at home in, multiple. Like we have 3 children, right? My wife and I are trying to raise 3 gentlemen, 3 different grades, 3 different schedules. Keeping everybody logged in when they're supposed to log in, keeping up with their work has been tough. It's been tough for the kids. It's been tough for parents. No wonder there's a level of frustration and desperation to reopen schools. As tough as it's been, we got to make sure that as we reopen safely. And so, again, I thank Governor Newsom for his leadership and the public health officials at the state and at the county levels for saying, this is what we want. This is how we get there, right? The protocols that need to be in classrooms or school facilities once kids return, including masks, sanitizing, et cetera. But even before we get there, baseline testing, frequency of testing, temperature checks, everything else that we all need to be ready to do our part if we're going to, not risk backsliding on the progress we've made for COVID-19. Proud to say that as we're talking here today, Mark, California has the lowest positivity rate of any state in the nation when it comes to COVID testing. So again, under the leadership of the governor, we have made tremendous progress to get to this point. Let's keep making more progress, not slide backwards.
Thank you. So 11:45, we'd like to go ahead and answer some questions. A number have come in by the email, and if I don't address them, Senator, I'll hear about it afterwards. So I'd like to address some of them. I have some other questions. Maybe we'll be able to get to them. But as a reminder, submit your questions to ppiceventquestions@gmail.com for Senator Padilla. Here's a question from Dan Smuts with the Wilderness Society. California has led the country in taking action to protect the environment and people, from reducing pollution and global warming gases to protecting public lands. Can you talk a bit about your vision for continuing this important work from your new position? And you mentioned that one of your committee assignments is on environment and public works.
Right. No, look, I think it's a tremendous opportunity to build on California's policy leadership and progress, using a lot of the policies that we put in place in California as a foundation for congressional action and national policy. Just one specific example I'll offer is, for 6 of my 8 years in the state Senate, I served as chair of the Committee on Energy, Utilities, and Communications. So a lot of the work that we've done to increase our use of renewable energy sources, for example, California showed that it can be done. You can maintain a strong economy and shift to a lot less use of fossil fuels. And so we've shown the rest of the country that it can be done. So it's not just an idea that we think is a good one, we're going to cross our fingers. We can use a successful model in California and have that be a foundation for a national renewable energy plan, and just kind of repeat that on when it comes to achieving cleaner air, cleaner water, land conservation, et cetera.
So this isn't actually part of the audience question, but one of mine is that we're going to be facing another wildfire season. Unfortunately, we're not in good shape with water, so we might be facing a drought. And what can we expect in terms of federal policy around climate change issues and emergency response? Unfortunately.
Yeah, well, again, number one, what a difference a president makes. A president believes in science and will trust the advice of firefighters, who have been some of the most outspoken leaders on climate change, because this extreme weather patterns on both ends that we hit, when it comes to wildfires, firefighters are literally on the front lines. So I think we have an administration that gets it and is willing to invest in it, along with the governor that gets it and is investing in it already. And another reminder, just like with masks on COVID-19, that we can all do our part. For a lot of folks who live in that wild land interface, right, in the suburbs, programs like brush clearance, things like that can really mitigate damage to homes and buildings when fires are in urban and suburban areas, not just in wilderness areas, things like that. But when I mentioned the extreme weather patterns that we see on one end with wildfires, it's also a reminder that just a few weeks ago, Texas was suffering devastating consequences because of their deferred maintenance on infrastructure when it came to ice storms, cold weather. So when we talk about climate change, it's not just global warming, it's really extreme weather patterns, the frequency and magnitude of extreme weather on all ends, which is a reminder that, yes, climate change is real, and maybe some of our Republican colleagues that will feel that infrastructure pinch and tragedy among their constituents back home will have a slightly more open mind, and another reason to take our investment in infrastructure in as broad and a comprehensive way as possible.
Thank you. Here's a question from Christian Arana, Vice President of Policy, Latino Community Foundation. FEMA is closing down its mass vaccination sites in Oakland and LA because they said the state leaders did not ask for them. With vaccine eligibility dramatically opening up and continuing vaccination disparities for communities of color, are you pushing FEMA to keep its sites open and even expand into areas like the Central Valley?
Yeah, so very much appreciate the question. It's extremely timely, and the answer is yes. One of the opportunities that come, not just with being a senator, but specifically at this time with the new administration, cabinet appointments coming through for confirmation hearings and votes. So FEMA folks, in front of me for a vote, yes, what do you have to say about this, this, and that? And so addressing the end time of FEMA's commitment to the mass vaccination sites in California was my very first question. In fact, I was just in Oakland yesterday on site at the Oakland Coliseum. So I think here's the news that we should all consider. When FEMA made the commitment under the Biden administration to come in and ramp up these mass vaccination sites, they were clear that their commitment was for 8 weeks only. Good news. Both Cal State LA and Oakland Coliseum have been tremendously successful. If you look at the number of people that have come through for vaccines, and specifically some of the we've been talking about equity off and on throughout the hour, and the people most devastated, communities of color, working class communities, it's been very accessible to them. We've seen the numbers go up there. Yeah. So no, we're not going to let this just simply close up shop when the 8 weeks is up. What we're facilitating is the transfer of these vaccination centers from FEMA, control and run to local control. The city of LA taking over the Cal State LA site. We hope that Alameda County will continue the operations in the Oakland Coliseum with support, especially funding from the federal government. But everything's been a partnership. Dozens of federal agencies, Cal OAS at the state level, and of course, local governments all have been working together, will continue to work together, regardless of whose name is on the door. Those vaccination centers will continue to operate.
Thank you. A question from a viewer in Los Angeles. Given how tied California and Mexico are to economic prosperity and jobs in California, how will you and the Democratic leadership in Congress work to ensure that Buy America provisions on the horizon, excluded from the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, do not do harm to our highly integrated system chains and slow down our regional post-COVID economic recovery?
Yeah, no, look, that's a great question. So in part, it's what the trade agreements that currently exist look like, and how we strategize around those, and also looking at what economic opportunity there are going to be, primarily for California, but in different regions of the country. So we get back to this equity question. It's not just rebuilding the economy for the sake of whose 401k portfolio does best on Wall Street, but looks at employment, economic opportunity more broadly, while tackling some tough questions when you look at ourselves in the mirror. Remember early on in the pandemic when there was shortages of things like face masks and toilet paper. Like, well, what's the supply chain looking like? Yeah. In the high tech sector, we're talking now semiconductors and what's built domestically versus abroad. So having a longer term strategic supply chain conversation as we're rebuilding the economy is challenging, difficult, not easy, but necessary.
And here's another question around the theme of equity. This is from Sharon Sand from the Trust for Public Land. We see the need for parks more than ever now, and the disparity in park access. Where do you see legislation at the federal level addressing park equity and access to nature?
Yeah, no, a great question. One that I've been vocal about for the entirety of my public service career. Remember, my first elected office was the Los Angeles City Council. Yes. So even when it comes to city and county parks, parts of the region that have more access to space, let alone facilities and recreation programs, state parks, you can ask a similar question, same at the federal level. So it's one that maybe the federal government can play a role in terms of providing funding, but it's one where the federal, state, and local governments have to work together to identify those opportunities, both for preservation and maybe new park creation in areas that especially, there's a direct linkage, by the way, from an individual's access to that outdoor space, that outdoor experience, and not just from a health perspective, but from an educational attainment level perspective, mental health perspective, on and on.
While we're on the theme of disparities, before our program ends, we only have 5 minutes left. I want to make sure that you have a chance to talk about at the federal level what actions you might see coming from some of the long overdue reckoning with racial inequities that we've been dealing with the last year. more recently, increases in anti-Asian hate crimes during the pandemic have been horrifying for Californians and people around the nation to watch. And people are still looking for movement at the federal level on issues of police brutality and racial profiling. So I wonder if you might talk about those two issues a bit.
Sure, and a couple of others that I think are clearly intertwined.
Okay.
Right. In my prior capacity as Secretary of State, we discussed voting rights, not just election integrity and security, but voting
I
rights,
want to
access
talk
to
to you
the
about
ballot.
voting rights too. Yeah.
In California, I think we have a great model. If you look at Georgia and Iowa and others today, not so great. And we've been reminded that voter suppression is rooted in white supremacy.
Yeah.
Right. We look at the insurrection that took place in our nation's capital on January 6th, all premised on the big lie, right? Donald Trump's false, baseless accusations of, voter fraud. But it was, for years and years, his effort to control who has access to the ballot and who doesn't through that racial lens. The insurrection was January 6th. We've been grappling through COVID for more than a year. Last summer was extremely significant in opening eyes and changing minds about ongoing systemic discrimination and institutionalized racism in so many forms across the country. And so we have a ton of work to do. I'm hopeful that, feelings, public opinion has changed on this because of the undeniability of George Floyd, if nothing else, number one. Number two, again, what a difference a president makes, because we now have an administration that has an attorney general that isn't turning a blind eye to this. As a member of the Judiciary Committee, I had a chance to raise questions with Merrick Garland when he was coming through for confirmation. And we've tried to dig into white supremacy. When FBI Director Wray was before the committee for reports, we raised questions about the increase in hate crimes and how the powers and resources of the federal government need to be reprioritized to address this, which is very real. It's happening now. It's spiking up. Let's base our activity and our investments based on facts and data, not on conspiracy theories and lies.
And I imagine your work on the Homeland Security Committee will be dealing with white supremacy and its threat as well. We're almost out of time, and there are a couple of questions I wanted to make sure that we got to. So you were appointed to complete the 6-year term of Senator Harris, and Senator Harris was elected in 2016. Are you planning to run for election to the US Senate in 2022?
So yes, I do intend to seek re-election election in 2022 for a full 6-year term.
And so you're serving California in the Capitol now, and you go back and forth between California and the nation. I'd like for you to share with our audience what, as we continue to emerge from the pandemic and deal with all of the issues that have surfaced around it, what gives you the most hope looking ahead?
The most hope? Okay, I think the stars are a little aligned right now. Again, as a proud Democrat representing California, majority in the Senate, a majority in the House of Representatives, President Biden in the White House to get a lot of good things done. And even if you sort of take the partisan lens away, as a nation, it's been a tough year. It's been a tough last 4 years. It is a new day, not just because of who our elected leaders are, especially at the federal level, but I think people have a newfound appreciation for public servants and public service, but also fundamental respect for the truth and things like science to help guide our decisions. We're going to get through this pandemic. We're making good progress. We're doing it together, and we just need to build on that momentum to make progress in all the areas we've been talking about this last hour: healthcare, education, economic opportunity, environmental protection, criminal justice, immigration reform, and so much more. We know it's doable, we know it's possible, and we have momentum right now.
Senator Padilla, I want to thank you for your service. And now you're taking that long cross-country commute between California and Washington, D.C. to represent Californians in the Capitol, and we appreciate that. And really, really appreciate your time here today. The time went very fast. We've reached the end of our program. I'd like to thank you on behalf of everybody in our audience for joining us today and everybody at PPIC.
Thank you, Mark.
I'd also like to again thank our sponsors and all of you for joining us today. And later you'll receive a survey and let us know how we did. We'll be hosting our next virtual speaker series program this coming Thursday on April 8th at 11 a.m. Our new Secretary of State, Shirley Weber, will join us in conversation. We hope all of you will be able to tune in for that program as well as this one today. Please be safe and have a good afternoon. Thank you.